My son came out as gay, and I thought I was supportive, until he brought home his boyfriend. I was the dad who high-fived his son for coming out, right before I failed the most important test of my life. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Robert, and I am 48 years old. For most of my life, I've considered myself a good man, a decent, progressive, open-minded guy. I'm the kind of person who donates to causes I believe in, who recycles diligently, who never tells a racist joke. I voted for marriage equality long before it was the law of the land, and I felt a quiet sense of pride in my own enlightenment. So, when my 19-year-old son, Leo, sat me down in the living room 2 years ago, his hands trembling and his voice barely a whisper, I was ready. I was prepared to be the perfect, supportive father. He took a deep breath, the air catching in his throat, and finally let the words out. He was gay. And in that moment, every progressive instinct I had cultivated over a lifetime kicked in. I didn't hesitate. I pulled him into a hug, feeling his tense body relax against mine. I told him I loved him, that this changed nothing, that I was proud of him for his courage. I meant every word. In the weeks that followed, I wore my allyship like a badge of honor. I mentioned it to my close friends, framing it as a testament to our strong father-son bond. Leo came out to me, I'd say, my voice laced with a self-congratulatory warmth. And I told him, son, you have nothing to worry about. I felt like I had passed a test, aced an exam on modern fatherhood I hadn't even known was scheduled. My acceptance was a theoretical thing, a clean, simple concept in my head. Love is love. It doesn't matter who you love, as long as you're happy. These were the mantras I repeated to myself, and I truly believed them. There was no room in my mind for prejudice, no space for the old-world thinking of my own parents. I was a new breed of dad. My wife, Clara, was just as wonderful, her love for Leo unwavering and her support just as vocal. We were a team, a modern family unit ready to face the world together. Leo seemed to blossom under our acceptance. The shadow that had hung over him for so long lifted, and he became more open, more himself. He talked more freely about his life, his friends, his interests. It was everything I had hoped for. I had successfully created a safe harbor for my son, a place where he could be his authentic self without fear of judgment. I patted myself on the back for a job well done, completely unaware that my support was built on a foundation of sand, untested by the tides of reality. I had accepted the idea of my son being gay, but I had never once considered the practical, messy, complicated reality of what that meant. The call came on a crisp Tuesday afternoon. I was in my home office, scrolling through emails, when my phone buzzed. It was Leo. We chatted for a few minutes about his classes, about a new video game he was hooked on. The conversation was light, easy. Then he paused. I could hear him take a breath on the other end of the line, a familiar sound that signaled something important was coming. Hey, Dad. So, I'm dating someone. His name is Julian, and I was wondering if I could bring him home this weekend to meet you and Mom properly. The words hit me like a physical force. My chest tightened. My smile, which had been fixed on my face, faltered. Of course, I heard myself say, my voice sounding strangely distant to my own ears. We'd love to meet him. After I hung up the phone, I sat in silence, staring at the wall. A cold, unfamiliar feeling was creeping through my veins. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disgust. It was something far more insidious, a deep, unsettling unease. The theory was about to meet reality, and I had a terrifying, sinking feeling that I wasn't the man I thought I was. The 48 hours between Leo's phone call and their arrival were a special kind of hell. I moved through the house in a fog, my body on autopilot while my mind spiraled. I found myself cleaning with a manic intensity, scrubbing countertops that were already clean, dusting shelves that didn't need dusting. It was a way to exert control, to tame the chaos that was erupting inside me. Clara, my wife, was the picture of genuine excitement. She baked a cake, Leo's favorite, and planned a menu that she knew would impress. She chattered away about what Julian might be like, her curiosity pure and open. I wonder what he studies, she'd say. arranging flowers in a vase. I hope he's nice. I just want Leo to be with someone who treats him well. Her words were like tiny needles pricking at my conscience. All I could think about were the scenarios my mind was relentlessly constructing. I was picturing them holding hands. I was picturing them kissing. I was picturing them sharing a room under my roof. Each thought was followed by a wave of shame so potent it made me feel sick. I was betraying my son in the sanctuary of my own mind. I kept trying to shove the feelings down, to rationalize them. This was just nerves, I told myself. It's the same feeling any parent has when their child brings home their first serious partner. It's the fear of the unknown, the protective instinct kicking in. But even as I formed the thoughts, I knew they were a lie. This was different. This was a primal discomfort I couldn't name. A feeling rooted so deep I didn't even know it existed. Saturday afternoon arrived with a brilliant, unforgiving sun. The doorbell rang and my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Clara rushed to the door, her face bright with anticipation. I followed behind her, my hands shoved into my pockets, my smile feeling like a brittle mask. There on the doorstep stood Leo, his face alight with a nervous joy, and beside him was Julian. He was not what I had expected. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't him. Julian was taller than Leo, with a slim, wiry frame. He had a shock of dark, artistically messy hair and a small silver ring in his eyebrow. He was wearing a faded band t-shirt and ripped jeans, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that was both intriguing and, to my dismay, deeply unsettling. He wasn't effeminate in any stereotypical way, but there was a softness to him, a gentle expressiveness in his face that felt foreign to my conditioned idea of masculinity. "Mom, Dad, this is Julian," Leo said, his voice full of hope. I shook Julian's hand. His grip was firm, but his skin was soft. He met my eyes directly, and his gaze was open and unflinching. "It's so great to finally meet you, Mr. Coldwell." His voice was calm, melodic. "Leo talks about you all the time." The pleasantries in the entryway felt like they lasted an eternity. We moved to the living room, and Clara, bless her, kept the conversation flowing with her effortless warmth. She asked Julian about his studies, his family, his hobbies. He was a photography major, he explained, passionate about capturing what he called the beauty in forgotten things. He spoke with an intelligence and a quiet passion that I couldn't help but begrudgingly admire. But I wasn't really listening to the words. I was watching. I was analyzing his every move, the way he leaned slightly towards Leo, the way his hand would occasionally brush against Leo's arm. I was a detective searching for clues in a crime I couldn't even define. Dinner was the real trial. We sat around our oak table, the food Clara had so carefully prepared steaming between us, and as they ate, I saw it. The casual intimacy. The way Julian would pass the bread to Leo with a small, private smile. The way Leo would look at Julian, his eyes full of a love so pure and obvious it was almost painful to witness. They weren't putting on a show. They were just existing. They were a couple, comfortable and secure in their affection for each other. And with every shared glance, every subtle touch, a wall inside me grew higher and thicker. I was polite. I asked questions. I smiled. But I was a ghost at my own table. A spectator in a play that I felt I hadn't agreed to be in. I was failing. And the worst part was, no one else seemed to know it but me. That night, long after Clara had fallen asleep, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. I replayed every moment of the evening, dissecting my own reactions with a brutal honesty I could no longer deny. The support that I had so proudly proclaimed was a fraud. It was a hollow, theoretical construct that had shattered the moment it was faced with reality.
I had not accepted my son. I had accepted a version of him in my head, one that didn't challenge my comfort, one that didn't require me to confront the hidden biases I had carried for a lifetime. The shame was a physical weight,
crushing me. I wasn't the progressive, open-minded father I thought I was. I was just a man with a prejudice he never knew he had, and my son was the one paying the price. The morning after was heavy with an unspoken tension. The sun streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but the light couldn't penetrate the chill that had settled over the house. I moved through my morning routine mechanically, pouring coffee, staring out the window at the pristine green of our lawn. I could hear Leo and Julian in the guest room, their muffled voices a reminder of the new reality I was so ill-equipped to handle. When they emerged, I was already on my second cup of coffee, my nerves frayed. Julian was wearing one of Leo's hoodies, a sight that should have been endearing, but instead sent another jolt of that strange, foreign discomfort through me. Clara, ever the host, had made pancakes. The four of us sat at the table, the silence punctuated only by the scrape of forks against plates. Clara tried valiantly to spark conversation, asking about their plans for the day, but her efforts were met with short, polite answers. The easy warmth of the previous night had evaporated, replaced by a stilted awkwardness that was entirely my creation. I could feel Leo's eyes on me, questioning, hurt. He was looking for the father who had hugged him 2 years ago, the man who had promised unconditional love. But that man wasn't there. In his place was a stranger, a man walled off by a silent, irrational fear. After breakfast, I announced I had to go into the office for a few hours to catch up on work. It was a lie. I just needed to escape. I needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with my own hypocrisy. I drove around for hours, aimlessly navigating the suburban streets, my mind a battlefield. I was desperately trying to find a way to justify my feelings, to frame them in a way that didn't make me a bad person. It's not that he's a boy, I told myself, gripping the steering wheel. It's Julian. He's so different. Is he serious about Leo? He's an artist, for God's sake. How is he going to support himself? Is he a good influence? Is he leading my son down a path I don't understand? I clung to these thoughts like a life raft. If I could make the problem about Julian, about his career choice, or his eyebrow ring, or his quiet intensity, then I could avoid the ugly truth. It was a classic defense mechanism, redirecting my prejudice onto a target I could criticize without feeling like a bigot. I was building a case against him, brick by brick, to protect the fragile image of myself as a good father. I came home late in the afternoon, hoping they would be gone, but they were there, sitting on the couch in the living room, watching a movie. They weren't doing anything inappropriate. They were just sitting close, Leo's head resting on Julian's shoulder, a picture of simple domestic contentment. And the sight of it, so normal and so beautiful, made something inside me snap. I didn't say anything. I just turned around and walked into my study, closing the door behind me. I heard a soft murmur of voices from the living room, and then silence. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on my door. "Dad?" It was Leo. I didn't answer. The knob turned slowly and he peeked his head in. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness that cut me to the core. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I remained silent, staring at my desk, unable to meet his gaze. He stepped into the room and closed the door. "What's wrong, Dad?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You've been weird all weekend. Is it Julian? Did he do something?" I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to confess everything, to lay bare my ugly, confused heart and beg for his forgiveness. But the words were trapped in my throat, choked by a lifetime of pride and a profound sense of shame. How could I tell my son that the man he loved made me uncomfortable? How could I explain that my love for him had conditions I never knew existed? So I did the only thing I could do. I lied. "No, of course not," I said, my voice hollow.
I'm just tired. A lot on my mind with work. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression searching. He knew I was lying. We both knew. But he didn't push it. He just nodded slowly, the light in his eyes dimming even further. "Okay," he whispered. We're going to head back to campus soon." He turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall, and with each step, I felt a piece of our relationship crumble. I had chosen my pride over my son, and in that moment of quiet cowardice, I had never felt more alone. The silence that followed Leo and Julian's departure was deafening. The house, which had always been a source of comfort and warmth, now felt like a mausoleum, a monument to my failure. Clara didn't say much at first. She moved around the house, cleaning up the remnants of the weekend, her movements heavy with a sorrow she was trying to suppress. But that evening, as we sat in the living room, the TV on but neither of us watching, she finally turned to me. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "Robert, what is wrong with you?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "That was awful. That was not the man I married. That was not the father Leo knows." I had no defense. I could only stare at my hands, the shame a hot, suffocating blanket. "I don't know," I mumbled, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I couldn't." "Couldn't what?" she pressed. "Couldn't be happy for your son? Couldn't welcome the person he loves into our home? Robert, you looked at that boy like he was a criminal." Her words were a mirror, reflecting an image of myself I couldn't bear to see. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing descent into a chasm between me and my son. Our phone calls became shorter, more perfunctory. The easy flow of conversation we once shared was gone, replaced by a stilted exchange of pleasantries. I could feel him pulling away, building his own walls to protect himself from the hurt I had caused. I was losing him, and I had no idea how to stop it. I was trapped in a prison of my own making, and the guilt was eating me alive. One afternoon, while aimlessly wandering through the house, I found myself in Leo's old room. It was mostly unchanged, a shrine to his childhood. On his desk, tucked into the corner of the frame, was a photo of him and me from a fishing trip years ago. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, his gap-toothed smile wide as he held up a tiny, wriggling bass. My arm was wrapped around his shoulders, and my own smile was one of pure, unadulterated pride. I remembered that day so clearly. I remembered the way he looked at me, like I was his hero, his protector, his whole world. Looking at that photo, the contrast with the man I had become was so stark, so painful. It felt like a physical blow. The unconditional love I felt for that little boy in the picture was the same love I felt for the 19-year-old man now. So why had it become so complicated? Why had I failed him so spectacularly? The photo shattered something inside me, the last of my brittle defenses. I sank onto the edge of his bed, the sobs I had been holding back for weeks finally racking my body. I wasn't crying for myself. I was crying for the beautiful, trusting relationship I had shattered. I was crying for the pain I had caused my son. I knew then that I couldn't fix this on my own. My biases were too deeply ingrained, my shame too overwhelming. I needed help. I needed guidance. That night, after Clara had gone to sleep, I sat in the dark with my laptop. I typed, "Parents of gay children support," into the search bar. The results brought up a local chapter of PFLAG, Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. They had a meeting the next night. The thought of walking into a room of strangers and admitting my failure was terrifying. But the thought of continuing to live this lie, of losing my son forever, was far worse. The next evening, I drove to a community center on the other side of town, a place where no one would know me. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, my heart pounding, my hand on the door handle. Every instinct told me to turn around, to go home, to pretend this never happened. But the image of Leo's face, full of hurt and disappointment, pushed me forward. I walked into a brightly lit room filled with folding chairs. There were about 20 people there, men and women of all ages. They were talking quietly, drinking coffee, a sense of quiet camaraderie filling the space. I took a seat in the back, hoping to remain invisible.
The meeting started, and people began to share their stories. A mother talked about her fear when her daughter first came out. A father spoke about his struggle to accept his son's partner. I listened, mesmerized. I heard my own fears, my own confusion, my own ignorance echoed in their words. I wasn't a monster. I was just a man on a difficult journey, and I wasn't alone. Then the facilitator, a kind-faced woman with a gentle smile, looked in my direction. Would anyone new like to share? My heart leapt into my throat, but for the first time in weeks, I took a breath and spoke. I told them everything. About my perfect support, about Leo bringing Julian home, about the wall I had built. My voice cracked with emotion as I described the shame and the confusion, the feeling of being a fraud. I confessed my hypocrisy, and as the words poured out of me, a weight I didn't know I was carrying began to lift. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the woman next to me reached over and put her hand on my arm. "Thank you for your honesty," she said softly. "That's the first step." I left that meeting feeling raw, exposed, but also, for the first time in a long time, hopeful. I had a long way to go, but I had finally taken the first step on the path to becoming the father my son deserved. The PFLAG meetings became my lifeline. I went every week, sitting in that same chair in the back, listening and learning. I was no longer just a man with a problem. I was a student, and the subject was my own heart. I devoured books and articles, not just about being an ally, but about deconstructing the subtle, pervasive ways society defines masculinity and family. I learned about unconscious bias, about the difference between tolerance and acceptance. Tolerance, I realized, was what I had offered. It was a passive act, a gritting of the teeth and enduring something. Acceptance was active. It was an embrace. It was seeing someone for who they are and celebrating their existence, not just allowing it. I began to understand that my discomfort wasn't really about Julian. It was about a threat to my own narrow definition of the world. It was about a challenge to the unexamined assumptions I had carried my entire life. This journey of self-examination was painful, but it was necessary. I was chipping away at a lifetime of conditioning, and with each small revelation, I felt a little lighter, a little more free. I knew, however, that this internal work was only half the battle. I had to make things right with Leo. I had to apologize. Not a flimsy, conditional apology, but a real, soul-bearing confession of my failure. The thought of it terrified me more than anything I had ever done. I called him one Tuesday evening, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "Leo," I said when he answered, "I need to see you. In person. Can I come to your dorm tomorrow?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear his hesitation, the ghost of my past behavior still lingering between us. "Okay," he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion.
The drive to his campus the next day was one of the longest of my life. I rehearsed what I wanted to say, but the words felt clumsy and inadequate. I found him sitting at a small table in a campus coffee shop, a textbook open in front of him, but his gaze was distant. He looked up as I approached, and his expression was guarded. I sat down across from him, the silence stretching between us, thick and heavy. I didn't waste time with small talk. I looked him straight in the eye, and I started. "Leo, I am so sorry," I began, my voice already thick with emotion. "I am so sorry. What I did, how I acted when you and Julian were at the house, there is no excuse for it. It was wrong, it was cruel." I told him everything. I didn't hold back. I told him about my theoretical support and how it had failed in practice. I admitted my confusion, my discomfort, my unconscious biases. I explained that I had been so focused on being a progressive dad that I had never done the real work of examining my own heart. "My acceptance was a lie, Leo," I said, the tears I had been fighting back finally streaming down my face. "And it broke my heart to see how it hurt you. I failed you. I wasn't the father you needed me to be, and I am more sorry for that than I can ever say. I also apologized to Julian through Leo. I pleaded, 'Please tell Julian I am sorry.' I made him feel unwelcome in our home. I judged him without even knowing him, and that is not who I want to be. He's important to you, and that makes him important to me. I just have to learn how to show it." Leo listened to it all, his face unreadable. He didn't interrupt. He just let me speak, my words filling the space between us. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me. The guarded look in his eyes had been replaced by something else. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was understanding. "Thank you for telling me, Dad," he said, his voice quiet. It means a lot that you're trying, that you're even here saying this." He paused. "But it's going to take time. You hurt me. You hurt us." "I know," I said, nodding. "I know. And I don't expect you to just forget it. I just hope you'll let me earn back your trust." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. It was a small word, but it felt like a lifeline.
I left that coffee shop with a fragile, trembling sense of hope. The bridge between us was broken, but I had been given the materials to start rebuilding it. As I drove home, I knew there was one more call I had to make. I pulled over to the side of the road, took a deep breath, and pulled up Julian's number. I typed out a message, my fingers fumbling over the keys. "Julian, this is Robert, Leo's dad. I know I have no right to ask, but I was hoping I could talk to you. I owe you a huge apology." I hit send before I could lose my nerve. Then I waited, my heart pounding, for the reply. The reply came 15 minutes later as I was sitting in my driveway, unable to bring myself to go inside. It was simple, direct. "Okay, when and where?" A wave of relief so profound washed over me that I had to rest my head on the steering wheel. We agreed to meet at a neutral park a few days later. As I walked towards the bench where he was waiting, I felt a nervousness that eclipsed even my conversation with Leo. This was different. I wasn't just apologizing to my son, I was apologizing to the young man I had made feel like an outsider in his own boyfriend's home. Julian was sitting calmly, a sketchbook resting on his knee. He looked up as I approached, his expression neutral, not hostile, but not exactly welcoming either. I sat down on the bench, leaving a respectful space between us. "Thank you for meeting me," I started, my voice a little unsteady. I wanted to apologize to you, personally. What I did was not about you, but you were the one who had to bear the brunt of it. I made you feel unwelcome and judged in my home, and for that, I am truly and deeply sorry. I went on echoing some of what I had told Leo, but focusing on the impact my actions must have had on him. I told him I was working on myself, that I was in a support group, that I was committed to becoming a person who could genuinely welcome him into our family. I didn't ask for his forgiveness. I didn't deserve it. I just wanted him to know that I recognized my failure and was taking steps to fix it. He listened patiently, his gaze thoughtful. When I finished, he closed his sketchbook. "I appreciate you saying that, Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice calm and even. "It was difficult. I love Leo very much, and all I've ever wanted is for the people he loves to love him back, without reservation." His words were simple, but they cut right to the heart of the matter. Leo is the most important person in my world, and seeing you hurt him, even unintentionally, was hard. But he told me about your meeting. He told me you're trying. That's what matters. We sat in silence for a few more minutes, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was a quiet, contemplative peace. Before we parted, he looked at me and offered a small, genuine smile. "Leo told me you used to be a photographer," he said. "He said you were really good." The small olive branch felt like a monumental gift. "A long time ago," I said, returning the smile. "Maybe I'll pick it up again." Time passed. The healing was not instantaneous. It was a slow, deliberate process of rebuilding trust, one conversation, one interaction at a time. I made a conscious effort to engage with Julian, to ask him about his photography, to listen to his ideas with an open mind. I found that when I let go of my preconceived notions, I saw a brilliant, kind, and talented young man who made my son incredibly happy. I started to see their love not as a challenge to my comfort, but as a beautiful, vibrant force in the world. A few months later, we had a small family barbecue for Labor Day. Leo and Julian came, and this time when they walked through the door, I felt a genuine sense of joy. I watched them interact with Clara, with my brother and his family. I saw Julian showing my nephew how to work the grill, his easy laugh filling the backyard. I saw Leo watching him, his face glowing with that same pure, uncomplicated love I had seen in the photo of him and his girlfriend from high school. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began to set, I found myself standing next to Julian as he was taking pictures of the golden light filtering through the trees. "You have a real gift for this," I said, looking at the image on the back of his camera. He smiled. "Thanks, Robert." He had started calling me by my first name, and it felt natural, right. I looked over at the patio, where Leo was laughing with his mother. In that moment, I saw it all clearly. The family I had always pictured in my head had been a narrow, black and white sketch, but the reality, the one standing in front of me, was a vibrant, full-color masterpiece. My journey had been painful, humbling, and at times deeply shameful. But it had brought me here, to this place of true, authentic acceptance. I had learned that love isn't about tolerance, it's about expansion. It's about allowing your heart to grow, to make room for more love, more joy, more life than you ever thought possible. And as I stood there, watching the people I loved, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I almost lost my son over a prejudice I didn't know I had. But in facing that ugly part of myself, I had found a way to be a better father, a better man. And I had gained a son.